오늘의 마지막 연사는 한국말도 잘하시는 예수의 신부님이십니다. 맥나마라 신부님, 파더 데니스 맥나마라. 맥나마라 신부님은 조지타운 대학에서 한국학과 사회학을 가르치시는 교수님이시며 서강대 학교와도 이제 친근하십니다. 저도 이제 전공은 아닌데 학교 다닐 때 뵌 적이 있습니다. 한국어뿐 아니라 중국어에도 능통하시고 미국의 대아시아 정책에 영향력이 큰 학자이기도 하십니다. 맥나마라 신부님께 지역 사이의 다리 놓기, 북한과 지역별 시민 외교에 대해서 연사를 청하겠습니다. 신부님. 네.
So thank you for that wonderful introduction. What I'd like to talk about is kind of bring a conclusion to the presentations today from a little different perspective, and that's the perspective of civil society. And I think Frank has just brought that up already. I think that's been very well addressed. I'd just like to take it a little further. Diplomacy suggests an interaction, an effort to understand differences, a commitment to find common ground. We often define politics as the art of the possible. And I think the best definition of diplomacy is the art of the improbable. In politics, we work to bridge differences. In diplomacy, we seek to avert war. Diplomacy may be difficult, but the opposite is devastating. Partisan bickering plagues politics, but it's fatalism that stalks diplomacy. Fatalism threatens our efforts to advance peace in many areas of the world, and especially on the peninsula. Today, fatalism is my foil, public or civic diplomacy my path, and peace my goal. I am not a government diplomat, but I have been working on Beijing on civil dialogues for more than a decade. I am not an official, but I have been training Department of State officials for over 3 decades. I am not a negotiator, but I have been coordinating fora on Korea in Seoul and Washington, California, Hawaii, as a priest and professor for over 5 decades. Today, I wish to briefly describe what I mean by civic diplomacy. I will then turn to what I call knowledge nodes within networks at universities and policy institutes. Here, scholars and experts pursue intercultural dialogues, understanding cross-cultural and historical divides. These networks also promote cross-border exchanges of experience and expertise on North Korea. So I suggest today that closer regional cooperation among knowledge or epistemic networks in South Korea, Russia, China, Japan, and the United States could advance policy formation and peace on the peninsula. So first, briefly, civic diplomacy. Embassies will promote a public dialogue on their nation's priorities, an office called public diplomacy or cultural affairs. Responsibilities with the media usually absorb their energies, though institutional ties with universities and sometimes even policy institutes may also gain attention. Now, I use this term civic diplomacy to highlight the non-governmental or societal forma for policy discussions. As Frank actually did right before me, we can also distinguish civic diplomacy with levels or tracks of cross-border negotiation. Track 1 would be the highest level of official dialogues. And note, by the way, how I said highest. Why is government dialogues the highest and civil dialogues the lowest? It's really not that at all. It's just the practice that we've developed. In contrast, Track 2 meetings would be more non-official, but often include former government officials and government institutes. And Frank pointed to Track 3, which would be more of a civil dialogue. I'm actually suggesting here a Track 2.5 dialogue. That's more the kind of dialogue I've been involved in. Oftentimes, when you're doing a dialogue from the United States on what we would call cross-cultural dialogue or on simply information dialogue, in the United States, we have people coming out of the universities that we call civil society. In Beijing, they come out of the universities, but they're party members, and they're oftentimes part of the party apparatus. So it's very hard to say a Track 3 dialogue. That's why I suggest 2.5. The term knowledge networks refers to established ties for exchanging both tacit and codified knowledge. Tacit refers to informal, often episodic channels, sometimes including both people, that is who you know, and processes, how you know. The latter term, codified knowledge, includes records, reports, more formal patterns of information that can be communicated in standardized formats. Domestic and national fora today dominate the landscape of knowledge networks on North Korea. The institutions and activities in South Korea, and particularly the University of North Korean Studies, well represented here today, are certainly the most prominent. Asian and Korea policy institutes here in D.C. and New York provide an excellent entree to U.S.-Korea policy. And these are supported by multiple universities across the United States with strong Korea units. We might look as well to similar networks in Japan, Russia, and China to fill out the picture of North Korea regional expertise, not national expertise, but regional expertise. Yet despite these developments in local expertise across national borders for intercultural dialogue and exchange on peninsular issues, these remain very, very limited. It's very hard for us to develop fora like this today, a real cross-national dialogue. So what impedes a cross-border integration of knowledge networks? Without doubt, the single overriding factor impeding both scholarship and policy dialogues is the absence of North Korea at the table. The question then is, how do we craft an effective cross-border conversation in civil society among the allies, among Russia and China and North Korea, without North Korea at the table? We cannot ignore the further problem of urgent security concerns dominating most discussions. And I must say here in Washington, D.C., as someone deeply interested in North Korea, it's very hard to get a North Korea dialogue which does not focus on security. I think that's a bit less so in New York and in the other parts of the United States, but we are heavily focused on security here in Washington. Given such difficulties, how can we foster a civic dialogue among these different knowledge networks? How can governments tap the expertise in civil society to shape a more effective policy for advancing peace? The issue of North Korea presents different challenges to each partner in this dialogue. It prompts different policy approaches for resolving these issues. Cross-cultural dialogues are designed to bring to the fore societal and cultural factors that divide us. Topics such as traditional and contemporary values, social ethics, and more practically family structure, generational changes, etc., provide a window on how nation-states come to define themselves. This approach to more fundamental values and structures does not focus on solutions, but rather on understanding. And secondly, a cross-fertilization among these different groups can develop when nations share expertise and information on critical issues. The civic dialogues provide a context less constrained by local politics, though not insulated from political differences. This would be the primary benefit of a more substantive, continuous regional dialogue, circles of scholars and policy analysts shaping and reshaping policy alternatives, a stronger, more dedicated bridging of local knowledge nodes across the region would help integrate and focus epistemic networks for policy formation. Among the partners, one already finds binational networks emerging, as South Korea in particular seeks partners abroad, including the CNAP conferences. Forums in Japan and the United States on North Korea issues already contribute to a stronger epistemic base. But who is not there? China remains the critical partner in this entire dialogue, with the best access to the policy and society of North Korea. Engaging relevant institutions in China on a regular basis in this cross-cultural type of dialogue, this cross-fertilization of knowledge nodes, is critical for bridging borders. Beyond that, initiating regional civic dialogues on the basis of existing binational exchanges would extend and deepen our resources of expertise and policy experience. And now let me just move to a conclusion about bridges. Returning from an Islamic Christian dialogue in Morocco 3 years ago now, Pope Francis did an interview on the airplane. It was published in American Magazine, April of 2019. He cited a novel by Ivo Andrić titled The Bridge, Andrina. He tells us that Andrić wrote that, and I quote, "The bridge is made by God with the wings of the angels so that we might communicate." Why? Because we can communicate, unquote. Francis continued, "This bridge is for human communication, and I have seen it here in Morocco. Walls are built to block communication, for isolation, and those who build the walls will become prisoners of those walls. I am proposing a bridging of knowledge brokers to advance peace on the peninsula. We can build out from a base of binational networks to regional exchanges among universities and policy institutes. This would help integrate existing knowledge resources while stimulating wider interest and deeper discussions. The political freedom and cognitive space to understand the past and to reimagine the present is a primary benefit of civic diplomacy. Policy stalemates and the fatalism that leads to discouragement remains a clear and present danger in peninsular discussions. A dialogue in civil society without the political constraints of, and I quote, official, unquote, exchanges can bring imagination to the fore. We need to recognize the present, but also to reimagine what could be the future on the peninsula. Thank you very much.